The storm did not simply arrive. It descended like a forgotten prophecy, awakening itself. It roared with the fierce authority of something older than the land, older than the sky, as if destiny had chosen this night to shake the earth awake. No one knew it yet, but this storm was carrying a meeting the universe had waited years to orchestrate. The first growl of thunder rolled across the horizon, like the voice of an ancient spirit, rising after a long slumber. The clouds, swollen and brooding, pressed low over the town as if they were preparing to swallow it whole. Winds surged with a sharpness that cut through the warm evening air, scattering dust, palm leaves, and the lingering scent of roasted yam from the marketplace. Then, without warning, the heavens tore open. Rain fell in violent, rippling sheets, so thick, so heavy, the world seemed to dissolve behind a shimmering curtain of water. The familiar songs of frogs, distant chatter, and the hum of evening life disappeared under the storm's authority. It was a night when even courage hid indoors, but Aderonke walked straight into it. Her umbrella, patched many times, its metal ribs twisted from years of service, shivered against the furious wind. She held it close, her fingers stiff from the cold raindrops hitting them like small stones. Her wrapper clung to her legs, each step a struggle against the mud rising beneath her feet. Her blouse was soaked enough to weigh down her shoulders, but she did not stop. She had learned long ago that stopping was a luxury life rarely offered people like her. She moved with purpose, a quiet determination carved from years of hardship, humility, and the unspoken victories that came from simply surviving each day. Lightning cracked again, illuminating the narrow footpath ahead. In that stark flash of white, she saw a shape, still tall, startlingly alone, standing beneath the old Iroko tree that had guarded the roadside for generations. The figure did not shift or shield itself. It did not flinch. It stood as though carved from the night itself. For a moment she thought the storm had deceived her senses, until the next flash of lightning revealed him fully. A young man, soaked, motionless, holding a notebook tightly to his chest as if it contained the last pieces of his spirit. Aderonke slowed, her breath catching in her throat. Something in the way he stood, straight but trembling, quiet yet brimming with silent desperation, pulled at her with a strength she could not name. He was clearly not from the village. His clothes, though drenched, whispered of a life that had once known opportunity. His shoes, muddied and worn from long travel, hinted at a journey far too heavy for someone his age. His face was tilted slightly upward, eyes closed, letting the rain wash over him like someone who had forgotten what warmth felt like. She knew she could walk past. She knew she had reasons. Her sick mother waiting at home, the worsening storm, the exhaustion clawing at her muscles. But her feet refused to obey reason. Instead, they carried her closer. Her heart tightened with a strange mix of worry and recognition, though she had never seen him before. There was something about him that felt unfinished, like a story paused in the middle of its most painful chapter. When she finally reached him, he did not open his eyes. He only clutched the notebook tighter, as if the storm wanted to steal it from him. Aderonke raised her umbrella gently, extending it toward him without the need for words. Only then did he open his eyes, and the world seemed to go strangely still. His eyes were dark, deep, and unexpectedly fragile, as if they carried a wound he refused to let the world see. He looked at her not with fear, not with surprise, but with the quiet disbelief of someone who had not been offered kindness in far too long. He stepped under the umbrella cautiously, as though he feared he might break the moment by breathing too deeply. Their shoulders touched, barely, but even that brief contact sent a ripple of awareness through the narrow space they now shared. Rain hammered around them, yet beneath the umbrella there was a trembling stillness, a breathless pause, a silent beginning. Neither of them understood. For a long moment, they simply walked, two strangers bound by a single fragile shelter, surrounded by the chaos of a storm that seemed too powerful to be accidental. But when she finally glanced into his eyes again, a chill swept through her. There was something there, something hidden, urgent, and dangerous in its quiet depth, a secret heavy enough to change everything that waited beyond this night. Some encounters arrive quietly, yet rearrange everything we believe about fate. Some strangers walk beside us for a moment and leave shadows deeper than years of memory. And sometimes, destiny fits itself beneath a single trembling umbrella. The rain had softened from its earlier rage, but still poured with a weight that demanded attention. Under the cramped shelter of the umbrella, Aderonke and the stranger moved carefully, their steps almost synchronized by necessity, more than intention. The narrow space forced them close enough to hear each other's breaths, soft, uneven, shaped by exhaustion, and something unspoken lingering between them. Each footstep splashed through puddles that reflected thin streaks of lightning, turning the ground into a canvas of trembling light. The world outside the umbrella felt distant, muffled, swallowed by the storm's rhythm. But inside this small cocoon of shared space, everything felt strangely sharp, real, focused, as if time had slowed just enough to take a quiet breath. It was Aderonke who finally broke the silence. Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. The stranger introduced himself as Kahinda, in a tone that carried the softness of someone unused to saying his name aloud. There was something unusual in the way he spoke, gentle but layered, like he was choosing each word with the precision of someone aware of how fragile the truth can be when carried in a tired heart. He described himself as a wanderer, someone traveling with no real destination, no family nearby, and no past he was willing to explain. His gaze drifted away when she asked innocent questions, as though answering them would open doors he had worked too hard to keep closed. Aderonke sensed the heaviness hovering around him, not the heaviness of wrongdoing, but the heaviness of a journey walked in too much silence. She felt an unspoken reverence for the vulnerability sitting in his quiet pauses. Without knowing why, she found herself sharing pieces of her own story, her mother's failing health, the quiet battles she fought each day at the market, the thin victories she celebrated alone, and the dreams she had buried beneath years of responsibility. She did not understand how this stranger made her comfortable enough to speak so openly. Perhaps it was the way he listened, truly listened, as if her words were the first warmth he had felt in a long time. Kahinda's attention never faltered. His silence was not empty. It was reflective, steady, almost protective. There was awe in his eyes when she spoke of her perseverance, her endurance, her small triumphs carved from hardship. He studied her face the way someone studies a map, searching for meaning, tracing lines of strength, recognizing the resilience etched into her expression. His presence beside her felt grounded, even though everything about his life suggested he had none of his own. The storm around them continued its merciless fall, but Aderonke felt something shift beneath the quiet conversation, a small unexpected connection forming between two souls who had never been meant to meet in an ordinary world. When they turned down her street, the muddy road felt strangely calm compared to their walk. The thunder softened, and the wind retreated as though it had carried them exactly where destiny intended. Aderonke slowed her steps, suddenly aware that this moment, however ordinary it appeared, was settling into the kind of memory that lives longer than logic can understand. Kahinda stopped walking and stood facing her with a stillness that made her chest tighten. He thanked her, not casually, not politely, but with a sincerity that felt almost reverent. His voice broke slightly, the way a voice breaks when it carries gratitude too large to fit into words. It was a thank you layered with longing, humility, quiet pain, and the unmistakable weight of someone who had not been shown kindness in far too long. She tried to respond, but the storm made it difficult to speak. Or perhaps it was something deeper, the awareness that this meeting meant more than either of them could yet comprehend. Kahinda stepped back slowly, as if detaching himself from a sanctuary he was not ready to leave. Then, with one last look, soft, searching, and heavy with unspoken meaning. He turned away and slipped back into the rain's shimmering veil. By morning, not a single trace of him remained. Not a footprint, not a broken leaf, not even the memory of where he might have gone. And for the first time in Aderonka's life, absence felt louder than presence. Something told her this was only the beginning. The strongest hearts are not forged in fire. They are shaped in silence, in moments when no one sees the struggle. Aderonki's life did not rise with grand victories. It rose from days that demanded everything and returned almost nothing. Yet in the quiet cracks of her routine, destiny had begun to rearrange itself. Morning arrived with a pale light creeping through the holes in the zinc roof, casting broken patterns across the clay floor. Aderonki woke before the first rooster cried, her body heavy from the storm-soaked journey of the night before. But there was no space in her life for lingering or rest. She rose with the steady resolve of someone who had long accepted that endurance was her inheritance and persistence her only companion. Her mother lay curled on the raffia mat in the corner, her breathing soft but labored, as though every inhale had to be negotiated with the universe. Aderonka knelt beside her, touching her forehead, offering quiet comfort with hands that had grown gentle through years of caretaking. Age had not taken her mother swiftly. It had taken her slowly, like a river wearing away at stone. No one understood the intimacy of watching someone fade except those who lived it daily. By the time she tied her wrapper and stepped outside, dawn had barely lifted. The village was still stretching awake, the charcoal sellers arranging their bags, the goats bleating for attention, the distant call of prayer weaving through the crisp air. Aderonki breathed in the scent of morning dust and damp earth, grounding herself in familiar discomfort before beginning her walk to the marketplace. Every step reminded her that life did not pause simply because the heart was tired. The struggles stayed, but so did the quiet victories, an extra coin earned, a good day of customers, or a moment where she could sit and simply feel the wind on her skin. The marketplace was a world of its own, noisy, unpredictable, always demanding. Vendors shouted offers to attract buyers. Children darted between stalls in playful hunger. The smell of ground pepper and roasted corn filled the air. Yet beneath the noise lived a different truth, the unspoken sisterhood of women who had learned to survive through grit and relentless will. Aderonka was one of them. They respected her for her strength, but she could see the pity in their eyes too. She carried more responsibility than many of them combined, yet she never complained. Complaints did not feed the sick. Complaints did not buy medicine. Complaints did not rebuild a life worn thin by sacrifice. As she arranged her goods, woven trays, dried spices, handmade soaps, her thoughts slipped back to the stranger from the storm. She had not meant to think of him again. Life had trained her well to release things that did not belong to her world. And yet, his eyes lingered in her memory, quiet and searching, carrying an ache she had not understood but had somehow felt. Something about the way he had looked at her, grateful yet wounded, had settled inside her like an unfinished sentence. She tried to push the memory away, focusing on her customers, on counting coins, on maintaining her usual discipline. But the thought returned again and again, subtle but persistent, like a distant song refusing to fade. The days that followed unfolded in a familiar rhythm, caring for her mother, rushing to the market, stretching coins to their limits, meeting the exhaustion that waited each night. Life offered her no explanations about the stranger, no signs, no reason to hope or fear. Yet something had shifted in the air, a quiet tension that hummed beneath ordinary moments. She felt it when she fetched water from the well. She felt it when she closed the market stall. She felt it when she lay awake at night, listening to the wind whisper against the mud walls. It was as if the world had begun to watch her closely, waiting, assessing, preparing. One evening, as the sun dipped low and coated everything in amber light, Adoranki walked home slowly, her mind full of the day's fatigue. She reached her doorstep, set down her basket, and paused. Something was different. Something was waiting. A single envelope lay on the ground, golden, heavy, gleaming like a fragment of sunlight that had refused to fade. Cliffhanger. Her breath caught as she reached for it, feeling its weight before she even opened it. The golden crest on the seal shimmered beneath the dying sun. Whatever waited inside was not ordinary, and her life was about to shift again. Some letters find their way into lives that were never meant to hold such power. Some envelopes arrive not by chance, but because destiny has finally turned its gaze. And sometimes, a single seal of gold can whisper the truth that fate has already chosen someone. On this evening, destiny knocked softly, yet its echo shook the roots of Adoranki's world. When Adoranki first saw the golden envelope resting silently at her doorstep, she felt the small hairs on her arms rise as if touched by an invisible force. There was nothing ordinary about it. Its surface shimmered like a piece of sunlight captured in paper, untouched by dust or fingerprints, as though it had fallen from a world that did not belong to her. The village around her continued with its usual noises, wooden pestles pounding yams, children laughing in the distance, the soft scatter of chickens searching for scattered grains. But her heartbeat drowned all of it. She bent slowly to pick it up, and the weight shocked her. It felt solid, deliberate, as if it carried not only words, but intent. Her breath trembled, with the awareness that something beyond her understanding had arrived at her feet. Inside her dimly lit home, she sat with the envelope lying across her lap. The twin lion crest embossed on the seal felt ancient beneath her fingertips. 2 lions facing a rising sun, symbols of royalty, power, and legacy. She had only ever heard of such symbols in whispered elder tales told at festivals. It made no sense that such a thing would find her. After a long moment, long enough for doubt to wrap itself around her chest, she broke the seal. The sound was soft, but in her little room, it felt loud, almost ceremonial. Inside was only a single card, plain white, perfectly cut, carrying only 5 impossible words. Your kindness is not forgotten. She read them slowly, tasting each word as though they carried a meaning too heavy to swallow. What kindness? What memory? Her life was too small, too predictable, too shadowed by struggle to attract the gratitude of powerful strangers. Yet these words did not feel random. They felt precise, written by someone who had watched her closely enough to understand the quiet weight she carried every day. The memory of the stranger from the storm flickered in her mind, subtle yet persistent, like the echo of a footstep in an empty hallway. Confused and unsettled, she took the envelope to Elder Olatunda's compound. The elder's reaction was immediate. His eyes widened, his hands stiffened. One by one, the other elders gathered, drawn by the whisper of a golden seal. Their faces tightened with recognition and fear. They spoke in low voices, as though afraid the walls themselves were listening. This symbol belongs to a dynasty older than most kingdoms, Elder Olatunda said, barely above a whisper. Their influence stretches beyond borders. Their decisions are never simple, and they do not reach out to common villagers without purpose. Adoranka felt the ground beneath her shift with each word. A dynasty, power, purpose. She left their home more shaken than enlightened. The elders knew too much to be calm, yet too little to offer answers. She walked home through the cool evening air, her heart full of questions she could not shape into words. Night settled over the village like a dark cloth. Lanterns flickered behind closed doors. Crickets began their chorus. Adoranka tucked the envelope beneath her pillow, as if hiding it could delay whatever truth waited behind its arrival. But when she stepped outside for a breath of air, something inside her froze. Beyond the last row of huts, at the far edge of the village, tall silhouettes stood motionless. They were not villagers. They were not travelers. They were watching. Their stillness held intent, as though they were guardians of a message she had not yet earned the right to hear. Their presence throbbed with silent purpose, waiting for the moment when shadows would become revelation. Aderonka felt it in her bones. This night was only the first ripple of a far greater storm. Destiny does not always knock on the door. Sometimes it waits in the shadows, studying the person it has chosen. Sometimes silence becomes louder than thunder when unseen eyes follow the path of one heart. And there are nights when the world feels watched not by danger, but by an approaching revelation, too vast to understand. For Aderonka, destiny did not call her name. It stood in the dark, waiting for her to notice. From the morning after the golden letter arrived, the village atmosphere shifted subtly, but unmistakably. People whispered in corners, lowered their voices near the market stalls, and cast uncertain glances toward the open fields. Stories traveled faster than truth in a place like this, and already children spoke of tall men standing near the riverbank at sunrise. Some claimed the men wore coats too fine for villagers. Others insisted they had the stillness of carved statues. What unsettled everyone was not their appearance, but their silence. They spoke to no one. They bought nothing. They made no attempt to blend in. They simply watched, as though waiting for something. Or someone. Aderonka felt their presence even before she saw them. It began as a weight behind her thoughts, a thin sensation like a shadow trailing just beyond her sight. Whether she walked to the well to fetch water, or stepped toward the market carrying her basket, the feeling followed, steady, persistent, unsettling. She was not a woman easily frightened, but the quiet certainty that she was no longer moving unseen prickled along her skin. She tried to dismiss it, blaming leftover unease from the mysterious letter. But the sensation tightened whenever she paused, like the air itself was holding its breath around her. At the marketplace, women who usually busied themselves with gossip spoke in careful tones. Mothers held their children closer than usual, their eyes scanning the dusty paths for figures they hoped not to find. The smell of roasted maize and ground spices mixed with the tension in the air, creating a strange undercurrent of fear and curiosity. While selling her woven trays, Aderonka noticed the subtle shift of the crowd, how whispers traveled from one ear to the next, how heads tilted toward the road, leading to the riverbank. Something unseen was steering the day. It wasn't until late afternoon, when she carried a basket of dried peppers toward the river to wash her hands, that she finally saw them clearly. Standing beside the tall reeds were 3 men, each one tall, composed, and dressed in clothing too structured to belong to local farmers. Their posture carried the rigid discipline of people accustomed to obedience and precision. But it was their stillness that set them apart. They did not gesture. They did not turn. They did not even speak among themselves. They simply existed with a controlled quietness, as if their bodies had been carved from the air itself. Aderonka paused mid-step, the basket growing heavy in her hands. For a heartbeat, she considered turning back. But the river was only a few paces away, and she had never been one to surrender to unease. She continued walking, though her senses sharpened in instinctive caution. The men did not move, yet she felt their awareness shift toward her like a silent wind. She washed her hands slowly, focusing on the ripples moving across the water's surface. Each ripple seemed to mirror her heartbeat, rapid, uncertain, waiting for something unnamed. When she turned, they were still standing in the same positions, but something about their stance had changed. Their focus seemed narrower, directed, almost deliberate. She tried to steady her breath, reminding herself that danger did not always come from stillness. And yet she knew these men did not belong here. She felt it in her bones, the way a traveler feels when they step into unfamiliar terrain. An ancient instinct awakening, caution rising with clarity. As the week unfolded, the watchers appeared in different corners of the village: the marketplace, the well, the narrow road beside the yam barn. They did not threaten. They did not approach. But their presence became an unspoken riddle, quietly eating at the village's peace. People hurried their children indoors before dusk. The elders pretended calm, but exchanged troubled glances. Even the goats sensed the shift, bleating anxiously whenever the watchers passed. Adoranki felt caught between fear and curiosity. Fear because nothing about their presence made sense. Curiosity because her life, once predictable and quietly burdensome, now felt tethered to a story she did not yet understand. And deep within her heart, she felt the faint echo of the stranger from the storm, the one whose eyes had carried a quiet urgency she had ignored. One cool evening, as the sun dipped behind the palm trees and shadows lengthened across the ground, Adoranki walked home with her basket pressed tightly against her hip. She sensed movement behind her, a shift in the air, a softness of footsteps too controlled to be accidental. She stopped. The world held its breath with her. When she slowly turned, one of the silent watchers stepped forward from the dusky path. He moved with the certainty of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. His gaze locked onto hers with intention that melted the space between fear and revelation. And then, in a voice that carried the weight of distant worlds, he spoke her name, as if he had known it long before she ever learned to say it herself. Some answers do not arrive with trumpets. They appear quietly in the form of a stranger carrying the weight of unseen kingdoms. Some truths step forward only when the heart is trembling enough to hear them. And sometimes, the arrival of clarity feels more frightening than the shadows that came before it. Tonight, Adoranki learned that destiny walks with an envoy. For a moment, neither of them moved. The tall man stood beneath the fading twilight, his frame still and commanding, as though carved from disciplined intention. Adoranki felt her breath catch in her throat as she tried to understand why her name sounded so different in his voice. Sharper, deeper, wrapped in the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The air around them shifted with a peculiar gravity, carrying a strange mix of caution and reverence, as if something monumental was about to unfold in this quiet village pathway. He stepped closer, not with aggression, but with a deliberate grace that revealed years of training etched into his posture. His clothing was unlike anything she had ever seen on men who traveled through their region, tailored, structured, woven from fabric that whispered of distant lands and high-ranking purposes. When he finally spoke again, the tone in his voice held no intention to threaten. Instead, it carried the steady reassurance of someone who understood fear and sought only to guide. "My name is Captain Ao," he said, his gaze never wavering from hers. "I serve as envoy to a dynasty you have only heard in whispers. I come to you not with harm, but with gratitude." Gratitude. The word struck her with unexpected force, so out of place on his tongue, so strange in the shadow of her simple life. She tried to speak, but her throat tightened in confusion. Captain Ao seemed to sense her struggle, and his expression softened, barely, but enough to reveal that he was not only a messenger of power, but also a man capable of empathy. "You are not in danger, Adoranki," he continued gently. "You are being sought because you have touched a life that carries more weight than you could imagine." Her heart thudded with a rhythm she could not control. The stranger from the storm surfaced in her memory. The trembling hands, the soaked notebook, the quiet sorrow in his eyes. She had pushed him out of her thoughts, dismissing the entire encounter as a moment too brief to matter. But now, under the intensity of Captain Ao's presence, the memory rose with clarity she could not deny. "The storm," she whispered, the word slipping out before she could stop it. At the mention of it, something shifted in Captain Ao's eyes, a mixture of acknowledgement and hidden respect. "Yes," he replied softly. "That night did not pass unnoticed, nor did your kindness." Adoranki felt the world narrow around her. The impossible connection formed itself before she could fully grasp it. "Kahinda," she breathed. The envoy inclined his head, confirming what her heart had feared and hoped in equal measure. "He has sent for you," Captain Ao said. "He remembers your courage when you had no reason to offer it. And now he insists that you must come. There are things waiting for you that only you may claim." She stepped back instinctively, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what stood before her. Kahinda had looked like a wanderer lost to the storm, a man with nothing but a soaked notebook and haunted eyes. Yet this soldier stood speaking of dynasties, gratitude, and summons. Adoranke felt the ground shifting under her again, the same way it had when she first touched the golden envelope. But Captain Ao didn't press forward. He let the silence breathe, understanding that her mind needed space to absorb what her heart already feared was true. The villagers nearby watched from behind half-open doors, their whispers floating on the evening wind. Some recognized the insignias on the envoy's clothing, symbols known only in stories about distant kingdoms. Others simply felt the weight of his presence and retreated into their homes, hoping not to be noticed. Yet Captain Ao's focus remained solely on Adoranke, as steady as the earth beneath them. "You must come to receive what is rightfully yours," he said finally. "A journey awaits you, one that began the moment you offered shelter to a stranger." Adoranke felt her breath unsteady again. Rightfully hers, nothing in her life had ever arrived willingly. Everything had been wrestled from hardship or earned through quiet endurance. The idea that something extraordinary could belong to her felt foreign, almost frightening. But curiosity, deep and trembling, began to rise beneath her uncertainty. Captain Ao reached into his coat with controlled precision, revealing something that glimmered even in the soft dusk, a sealed invitation plated in pure gold. Its surface shimmered with the authority of a world far beyond her understanding. Its weight carried the echo of promises she hadn't yet heard. And as it pressed into her trembling hands, Adoranke realized this was no invitation at all. It was the key to a destiny she could no longer outrun. Sometimes destiny does not shout. It waits at the edge of a trembling decision. Sometimes a single step, taken in fear, carries the power to rewrite a lifetime of struggle. And sometimes a journey begins, not because the traveler is ready, but because the world has already chosen her path. For Adoranke, the unknown did not call her name. It simply opened its doors and waited. The night after receiving the golden invitation unfolded with a tension she could feel in her bones. Adoranke barely slept, lying awake beside her mother and listening to the soft rustle of leaves outside. Her world felt suspended between two truths, the life she had known and the life that was now reaching for her with an unfamiliar pull. At dawn, when Captain Ao returned as promised, she stood before him with uncertainty pressing against her ribs. Her mother watched from the doorway, her frail hands trembling slightly, yet her eyes carried a quiet blessing. There were no grand farewells, only a silent exchange of trust between two women who had survived together. With a final steadying breath, Adoranke climbed into the convoy, waiting beyond the compound walls. The vehicles were unlike anything she had ever seen. Sleek, dark, crafted with an elegance that felt both intimidating and awe-inspiring. As the engine hummed to life, she pressed her palm to the window, watching the only world she had ever known drift behind her like a fading echo. The village huts, the dusty roads, the familiar scent of smoke and yam, all of it shrank slowly with each passing second. Yet the further they traveled, the more she sensed something shifting inside her, a growing awareness that she had stepped onto a path that was never meant to be simple. The earth itself seemed to hum with purpose beneath the wheels. At first, the landscape unfolded in familiar ways: dry farmlands, scattered palm trees, goats wandering lazily across narrow paths. But soon the scenery began to change. The dusty roads widened into smoother lanes, then into paved roads that gleamed like polished stone. Villages grew into towns, and towns grew into bustling intersections filled with vehicles she had never imagined. Adoranke watched everything with the silent awe of someone who had spent her life standing on one side of a window and was now finally seeing the world on the other side. Tall buildings rose in the distance, their surfaces catching the sunlight in silver reflections that painted the horizon in shimmering patterns. Captain Io remained silent beside her, maintaining the posture of a man who understood that explanations must arrive only when the moment demanded them. His silence did not feel cold. It carried the quiet weight of someone who respected the gravity of her journey. Occasionally he glanced at her with subtle reassurance, as though reminding her that fear did not diminish courage, and uncertainty did not erase destiny. She found comfort in his stillness, even though the questions in her heart grew heavier with each mile. Hours passed, and with every turn, the world seemed to widen. The air itself felt different, cooler, richer, as if it carried stories she had never been allowed to hear. Adoranke's thoughts drifted to Kahinda. The memory of his eyes returned, the quiet sorrow, the hidden weight, the unspoken urgency. She remembered the tremble in his voice, the way he had looked at her as if she had reached into the storm that lived inside him. Now, knowing he had sent for her, she felt a strange mixture of anticipation and fear. What could he possibly want from her? Why did someone with power, lineage, and wealth reach back toward a woman whose entire life had been a battle for basic survival? The convoy continued deeper into unfamiliar lands. Traffic faded. The road straightened. Forests rose on either side, dense, ancient, whispering secrets with every shift of the wind. Their presence felt almost ceremonial, as though the trees themselves bowed respectfully as she passed. The sky above softened into a golden dusk, casting long rays of amber light across the earth. The moment grew heavy with significance. Then, slowly, the convoy began to reduce speed. Adoranke leaned forward, sensing the change before she understood it. Captain Io inhaled deeply, his expression shifting with solemn importance. Ahead of them, beyond a sweeping curve, something massive emerged into view. Stone walls towering high above the road, columns carved with symbols she could not decipher. A pair of colossal bronze lions stood at the entrance, muscular, fierce, majestic, guarding what lay beyond with silent authority. The convoy rolled to a complete stop, and the world around her seemed to hold its breath. The bronze lions gleamed in the dying sunlight, watching her with eyes that felt almost alive. And as Adoranke stepped out of the vehicle, the gates before her began to open. Slowly, deliberately, as though welcoming home someone who had never known she belonged there. Some places are not crafted for the world. They are carved for a single soul whom fate chooses quietly. Some walls rise not from wealth alone, but from the memory of someone whose kindness shaped the heart of a powerful man. And sometimes, a palace exists not to impress the eyes, but to reveal a truth the soul has waited years to hear. This was not a home. This was an echo of Adoranke's own spirit, built in gold. As the colossal gates eased open, the soft groan of their movement felt like an ancient ceremony, awakening after years of silence. The convoy rolled forward slowly, almost reverently, as though the vehicles themselves understood the gravity of the space they were entering. Adoranke's breath caught the moment she saw it. Beyond the gates, rising like a captured sunrise, stood a palace clothed in gold. Every stone, every beam, every pillar shimmered softly, as though sunlight had spilled across the structure and chosen to stay. It did not shine with arrogance. It glowed with quiet majesty, warm and inviting, like a promise kept in secret for far too long. The vast courtyard stretched forward in polished marble that reflected the sky above with such clarity it looked like she was walking on light. Fountains carved from ivory lifted arcs of water that shimmered in the air, catching golden reflections from the palace walls. Adoranke stepped out of the vehicle with care, half afraid the ground would shift beneath her, half afraid this vision would vanish if she blinked. Captain Io remained by her side, giving her space to breathe, to absorb, to understand that she had not been brought into a dream. She had been brought into a revelation. The palace doors stood tall and carved with intricate symbols she could not decipher, yet they felt strangely familiar. Patterns that resembled the woven mats she used to sell at the market. Lines that curved like the markings of tribal cloth passed down through her village. Colors reflecting the dyes from the hands of women who shaped fabric with skill and patience. Every piece of detail whispered of home, not her poverty, not her struggle, but her heritage, her identity. It felt impossible, almost unsettling, that a palace of such magnitude carried the quiet language of her people so intimately. As she stepped across the threshold, servants lined the hall in precise formation. They bowed smoothly, their movements synchronized with a grace that seemed almost rehearsed for years. Their eyes did not carry judgment or pity. They held a quiet reverence, as though bowing not to wealth, but to the woman whose footsteps echoed inside the heart of their master. She moved past them slowly, the golden light catching in her hair, her breath trembling as she tried to comprehend the impossible truth. Inside, the palace felt even more unreal. Tall corridor walls were adorned with tapestries that looked hand-woven from dyes she recognized from village markets. The exact shades of indigo and clay her mother once used to teach her which fabrics carried the best stories. The floors gleamed with polished stone, but not a cold, foreign type. Instead, they carried patterns similar to the designs carved on ceremonial stools used by elders during harvest celebrations. Even the lanterns hanging from the ceiling bore markings she had seen etched into calabashes during sacred festivals. Someone had not only studied her world, they had honored it. The further she walked, the deeper the ache in her chest grew. Because with each step, the truth pressed harder against her. This place had not been built at random. It had been built with intention, with memory, with care, as though someone had held her stories close enough to craft an entire palace from the fragments of her life. Adoranki paused in the grand hall, her heart trembling. A long staircase rose before her like a golden river frozen into steps. Its rails curved with perfect craftsmanship, decorated in motifs that held both royal authority and village warmth. The sunlight filtering through the high windows painted the staircase in soft radiance, turning every step into a glowing promise. Her throat tightened, her hands trembled, her mind spun with questions she had no language to ask. Then, softly, gently, she heard it. A voice, calm, familiar, unmistakable, calling her name from the top of the golden staircase. Her heart froze, her breath stilled, and the palace seemed to tilt in recognition. The voice carried memories she had tried to bury, and hopes she never dared to have. And as she lifted her gaze toward the staircase, she realized she was about to face the one truth she had never prepared her soul to meet. Some kings rise because destiny paved their path, but others rise because a single act of kindness reshaped the map of their soul. Some rulers inherit power, while others rediscover themselves through the humility of losing everything. And sometimes, the greatest crown a man wears is not gold, but gratitude that refuses to be forgotten. Tonight, the stranger from the storm stepped forward, not as a wanderer, but as the truth Adoranka never saw coming. Adoranki stood rooted to the polished floor as the figure descended the grand staircase, each step echoing through the shimmering hall like a slow heartbeat, pulling her toward revelation. The golden light caught on his attire, not extravagant robes or glittering jewels, but simple, elegant clothing that held quiet authority. It was the simplicity that struck her most. True royalty rarely needed spectacle. Strength, dignity, and presence were their true ornaments, and Kahinda wore them with an ease that made the world around him feel suddenly smaller. When he reached the final step, he paused, allowing her a moment to see him fully, not the soaked stranger trembling beneath a dying tree, but a man shaped by lineage, burden, and purpose. The quiet sorrow she had once seen in his eyes still lingered, but now it was wrapped in something steadier, wisdom carved from lessons the world had forced on him. His gaze met hers, and the air in the hall tightened with a tension so delicate it felt like holding breath inside a sacred room. "Aderonka," he said softly, and the sound of her name on his tongue brought back the entire storm in a single heartbeat. "You gave shelter to a man you did not know, a man who, on that night, had lost protection, identity, and direction." She felt the memory ripple through her chest, the icy rain, the trembling notebook, the quiet way he had walked beside her. It had been a moment so small, so ordinary, she never imagined it mattered beyond the safety of the night. Yet here he stood, changed yet undeniably the same, holding a truth she hadn't asked to hear. Kahinda took a steady breath before continuing. "I was not wandering without purpose. I was on a journey my father required of me, a journey of humility, to walk without a crown, without guards, without privilege, to understand the weight of the people I was meant to lead." Aderonke's eyes widened. Her breath fluttered in her chest, fragile as a leaf caught mid-fall. She had known royalty existed far beyond her world, but never had she imagined she had sheltered one under her fading umbrella. "That night," Kahinda said, his voice quiet but unshakably firm, "I was abandoned by those sworn to protect me, betrayed by fear, caught in a storm stronger than anything I had prepared for. I had nothing left, not the power of my name, not the safety of my rank." His hand brushed the edge of the staircase, grounding himself. "And then you appeared." Aderonke swallowed hard, her heart tightening at the memory. She had not seen royalty in his eyes that night. She had seen loneliness, vulnerability, a soul holding itself together in the rain. "You did not ask who I was," he continued. "You did not hesitate. You did not measure my worth. You simply shared the shelter you had." His expression grew tender, reverent, as though he were standing in the presence of something sacred. "You saved more than my body. You saved the part of me I feared the world had stolen." The hall felt impossibly still. Aderonke's thoughts tumbled into one another. Fear, awe, disbelief, and something softer that frightened her even more. Why her? Why would a man of such power return to a woman whose life had been nothing but quiet endurance? "I vowed that night," Kahinda said, stepping closer, "that your kindness would not vanish into the storm. I vowed that I would honor it in a way the world could not ignore." Her voice escaped in a whisper. "Why me?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because in a world full of people who chase power, you offered shelter without asking what it could buy you. That kind of heart is rarer than gold." She felt her knees weaken, not from fear, but from the gravity of being seen so deeply by someone she barely knew. Kahinda glanced around the golden hall, then back into her eyes with a softness that held centuries. "Everything you see here, all of it, exists because of that single moment." Aderonke's breath stopped. Kahinda stepped forward, his eyes glowing with a truth that shattered the last pieces of her disbelief. In a voice both steady and vulnerable, he offered the revelation she was least prepared to accept. "Aderonka, this entire palace, every stone, every carving, every dawn-colored wall, was built for you." Kindness offered without expectation has a way of echoing back with the force of a storm long forgotten. Sometimes the smallest gesture becomes the seed of a destiny too large for the hands that planted it. And there are moments when the heart trembles, not from fear, but from standing in the presence of gratitude, too immense to comprehend. Tonight, Aderonke learned that humility can be heavier than any crown. The hall fell into a hush so deep, it felt as if even the golden walls leaned in to listen. Aderonke shook her head slowly, her breath unsteady as the truth settled over her, like a weight she had no strength to carry. The palace, this impossible creation of light and memory and craftsmanship, felt like a dream too extravagant for her calloused hands and simple life. She stepped back, her fingers trembling as though they feared to touch this reality, afraid it would crumble beneath her doubt. Her voice, when it finally emerged, was a whisper shaped by disbelief. "This cannot be for me," she said, tears already burning at the edges of her eyes. "I cannot accept something this grand. I am no one." Kahinda watched her with a calmness that only deepened the ache inside her. There was no pride in his gaze, no satisfaction, only a profound gentleness, as if he understood that the greatest shock was not the palace itself, but the realization that she had been seen, remembered, honored by someone whose world towered so far above her own. He stepped closer, hands clasped behind him, choosing his words with the reverence of someone approaching sacred ground. "Adoranki," he began, his voice warm yet steady. "This is not payment. It is not a gift meant to erase your struggles. It is not a symbol of wealth or power." His gaze flickered across the golden halls, softening with memory. "Everything you see here was built to honor what you carry inside. Your courage, your compassion, your dignity even in hardship. This palace is not a reward. It is recognition." She struggled to breathe as his words pressed gently but firmly into her heart. Recognition. A word she had rarely felt in her life. People admired her strength, yes, but from a distance, with pity in their eyes. No one had ever looked at her with this depth, this quiet understanding, this acknowledgement of the battles she had fought silently for years. Kahinda continued, his tone steady, articulate, overflowing with the sincerity of someone who had rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times. "During our walk in the storm, you did not speak like a woman crushed by life. You spoke like someone who carried an entire world on her shoulders, yet found space to offer kindness to a stranger. I remembered every detail you shared, not because your words were extraordinary, but because your strength was." Adoranki's lips parted in tremulous surprise. She had never imagined he remembered any of it. The stories she had spoken quietly under the rumble of thunder. Her mother's illness, her struggles in the market. Her dreams are buried beneath survival. Her hopes she no longer dared to say aloud. Yet Kahinda recited them with gentle accuracy, as if every sentence had carved itself into his memory the moment she spoke it. "I remembered how you described your mother's favorite fabric pattern," he murmured, gesturing to the tapestry beside him. "I remembered the scent of your village harvest festivals, the way your father taught you to weave, the colors that comforted you as a child. I remembered the way you sighed when you spoke of dreams you no longer believed you deserved." His voice tightened slightly, rich with emotion. "These walls hold your stories because I carried them with me, long after the storm ended." Her tears fell freely now, warm and uncontrolled, slipping down her cheeks like a confession she had held in for years. She had never imagined her pain, her memories, her small hopes could matter to anyone, least of all a man whose lineage stretched across continents. The hall around her seemed to pulse with something alive, something sacred, something built not from gold, but from reverence. Her knees weakened beneath the weight of gratitude she did not know how to hold. She pressed a hand to her chest, struggling to steady the storm inside her. "Why would you do all this?" she whispered, voice raw with disbelief. Kahinda stepped closer, his presence calm and grounded, his eyes carrying the quiet intensity of a truth long guarded. "Because your kindness did not just save me," he said softly. "It reshaped me." He paused, not from hesitation, but from the gravity of what he was about to reveal. "But there is one more truth you must hear," he continued, his voice dropping to a deep, trembling quiet. Adoranka felt the air shift as if the palace itself leaned in to listen. Kahinda's eyes softened with a vulnerability he had not shown before, and with a breath that seemed to carry the weight of years, he whispered, "There is something I have hidden from you, something that changes everything. Some secrets do not hide in darkness. They wait in the quiet, patient places of the heart until the world is ready to hear them. Some truths grow silently, gathering courage until the moment they step forward and change the shape of everything they touch. And sometimes, destiny reveals itself not with thunder, but with a confession spoken in a trembling breath. Tonight, Adoranki stood on the edge of a truth that had followed her far longer than she ever knew. The Golden Hall felt impossibly still, as though every shimmering surface paused to witness what was unfolding. Adoranki's breath wavered, her heart beating in a rhythm that did not belong to her alone. Kahinda stood before her, not the wanderer she had sheltered, not the heir wrapped in royal lineage, but a man stripped down to the most vulnerable part of himself. His shoulders, once carried with quiet command, now trembled with a weight he was no longer willing to hide. "Adoranka," he said, voice softened by a truth long trapped inside him. "You deserve to know everything." He breathed deeply, gathering memories that had lived too long in silence. "Since the night of the storm, I have watched over you, not from a place of power, but from a place of gratitude. The guards who stood in the shadows, the letter that reached your doorstep, the protection you never asked for. They were all my doing." His voice cracked slightly, as though the confession itself carried years of longing. "I could not forget the woman who offered me shelter when she had so little to give." Adoranki felt something shift inside her, a quiet unraveling of understanding. The shadows she had feared, the watchers who stood in silence, the mysterious envelope and the crest she could not comprehend. All the fragments of uncertainty, fear, and curiosity suddenly aligned like pieces of a puzzle that had been waiting for the right moment to reveal its image. She felt lightheaded, not from shock, but from the weight of realization settling into her chest. Kahinda stepped closer, each movement slow, deliberate, shaped by reverence rather than entitlement. "Your courage changed me," he continued. "It reshaped the man I thought I was. It forced me to question the legacy I was expected to uphold and the kind of leader I wanted to become. You taught me, without knowing it, that compassion is not weakness, that humility is not surrender, and that strength can be quiet, yet unbreakable." His words wrapped around her with the intimacy of a confession whispered in dim lamplight. Adoranki had never imagined her small act, one umbrella shared on a stormy night, could ripple into something this profound. But the sincerity in his eyes told her he was not exaggerating. He was revealing a truth that had been carved into his very being. "Everything I have done," he said, his voice trembling with raw honesty, "was not to repay you. It was to honor what you awakened in me." Her throat tightened. She felt as though her life, once shaped by struggle and routine, had cracked open to reveal a depth she never knew she carried. The palace walls glowed warmly, reflecting her stunned expression back at her, making the moment feel sacred and fragile. But then Kahinda's voice softened further, so gentle it seemed to wrap around her like a trembling embrace. "There is more," he whispered. "A truth I have carried since the storm. One I have held close because it frightened me, and because it changed me." He took another step forward, and the air between them thickened with an emotion that neither had been prepared to face. "Adoranka, from the moment you lifted that umbrella, my heart knew something it had never known before." Her pulse quickened, her breath catching at the edges. No one had ever spoken to her this way, not with reverence, not with vulnerability, not with the raw courage of someone willing to lose everything in the name of truth. "My heart has belonged to you since that night," he said, each word trembling with devotion. "I guarded you not out of duty, but out of love I could no longer deny." Adoranki felt the world tilt around her. Her knees weakened. Her soul trembled beneath the enormity of what she was hearing. She had never imagined her life could intersect with love so deep, so unexpected, so overpowering. And then, slowly, Kahinda lowered himself to one knee. The hall brightened as though the palace itself held its breath. His eyes lifted to hers, steady, vulnerable, carrying the weight of eternity. And in a voice that trembled with both fear and hope, he asked the question that could bind their destinies forever. Adarranque, will you stand beside me? Every destiny eventually narrows into a single breath, a single choice, a single moment when silence decides the future. Some questions are not asked to be answered. They are asked because the heart has reached a place it can no longer hide from. And sometimes, the sky itself becomes witness to the turning point in two souls meant to collide across storms and kingdoms. On this evening, beneath a horizon burning with gold, Adarranque stood at the doorway of a life she had never dared to imagine. The sun hung low behind the palace, spreading molten light across its walls until the entire structure seemed to breathe with a warmth that touched everything within its reach. The courtyard shimmered like a quiet lake of fire, each reflection a reminder of how far Adarranque had traveled, from cracked soil and dusty markets to a world painted in brilliance. The air carried the scent of blooming jasmine and something richer, almost ceremonial, as if the earth understood it was about to witness a moment carved into destiny's hidden scrolls. Kahinda knelt before her, not as a king demanding loyalty, but as a man offering his heart with a humility that softened the edges of his power. His simple attire glowed softly in the evening light, making him appear almost humanly fragile, despite the weight of the empire behind him. Around them, servants paused in respectful silence, and even the wind seemed to pull back, leaving the world suspended in breathless stillness. Adarranque's hands trembled slightly, the magnitude of everything pressing onto her shoulders like a cloak woven from past sacrifices, present uncertainties, and a future rising too quickly before she could gather her breath. She felt the imprint of her old life tugging inside her, the clay floor of her mother's home, the smell of peppers drying in the market sun, the years shaped by endurance and quiet survival. But she also felt something new, a pull, warm and steady, urging her toward a life she had never imagined she deserved. Kahinda's eyes held hers with a sincerity that stripped away titles and crowns, revealing the man beneath the legacy. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried the weight of all the miles he had walked since that stormy night. "Adarranque," he whispered, "I ask not for your loyalty, nor your gratitude. I ask for partnership. Walk beside me, not behind me, not beneath me, beside me, in life, in leadership, in all that lies ahead." The words echoed inside her, settling into places she had kept shielded for years. No one had ever asked her to stand beside them. She had always been the helper, the caretaker, the unseen strength holding her world together. To be asked to stand beside a king, equal, valued, recognized, felt like a truth too large to fit inside her chest. The sky deepened in color, shifting into a tapestry of burnt gold and soft crimson, painting their silhouettes into something almost mythical. Adarranque's breath quivered as she looked at him. This man who had walked through storms, who had hidden his identity to learn humility, who had remembered every small detail she had ever shared, who had built an entire palace from her memories because she had given him something no riches could buy. Her heart beat with a mixture of fear and wonder. She was no queen. She was a village woman shaped by hardship, stitched together by sacrifice. But Kahinda saw her as something far greater, saw strength where she saw struggle, saw grace where she saw survival, saw potential where she saw limits. "Why me?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. "Because my destiny shifted the moment you chose kindness over fear," he replied. "Because you saw a man in need, not a crown in hiding. And because my heart has remained with you ever since." Tears gathered at the edges of her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that her life had carried meaning far beyond what she ever understood. A single act of compassion had rewritten the arc of an empire. She felt the weight of her decision gather like a storm in her chest. Kahinda waited, not rushing, not pleading, only holding space for her choice. Her lips parted. Her breath trembled. The world leaned in. And just as she gathered the courage to speak, the palace lights flickered as though touched by an unseen force. A distant sound echoed across the golden courtyard. Soft, urgent, unfamiliar. Adoranki's answer trembled on her tongue, as destiny prepared yet another twist no one saw coming. If this story touched your heart, then don't let the journey end here. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next tale. Destiny has written for you. Like and share this video with someone who still believes kindness can change a life. Comment below and tell me which moment stayed with you long after the story ended. Your voice strengthens this community. Stay with us for more stories born from courage, love, and destiny.